What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be breaking down all of the main card fights from this weekend's UFC Fight Night Cannonier versus Vettori card, and I hope that you're going to be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions, maybe even earn some extra cash. And don't forget, if you like the breakdown videos for the main card fights, you can get breakdowns for all the prelim matchups over on my website, MMABettingTips.com. I'll leave a link for that in the description below. On my website, you can find access to all my bets, private Discord server, all kinds of good stuff that I'm sure you're going to like a lot. For example, last weekend, very late in the week, when I researched the fight between Jasmine Jasudavicius and Miranda Maverick, placed a bet on Jasudavicius at really nice underdog odds to give us an overall profit on the night. And of course, you know, there are obviously a lot of betting opportunities in prelim matchups. Recently we bet Hooper as an underdog to beat Nick Fury, Tainara Lisboa in the even money odds range to beat Jessica Rose Clark. So like I say, if you like the breakdowns, the analysis for the main card fights, you can get all the prelim stuff over on my website, MMABettingTips.com. And if you'd like a little sneak peek into what you can get by joining my website, I've just uploaded yesterday a video to my YouTube channel of my breakdown for the Jasudavicius Maverick fight, which I put out on my website last week. As you can see, if we go to last week's event page, you can see breakdown videos for every single fight on every single UFC card. And the reason why I'm not able to put out the breakdowns for the prelim matchups on YouTube is because I'm quite often still, researching, 2 or 3 fights the day before or actually on the day of the UFC event. So if I waited until I'd researched every fight on a card to put a YouTube video out, the YouTube video wouldn't be posted until, a few hours before an event, which is no use to anyone. And people say, oh, just research the fight sooner. It's very, very difficult. Obviously, trade a lot of crypto, pretty much betting football full time these days, and so it takes so long, so much time to research a UFC card properly in its entirety. Like, to properly research a UFC card and the level of depth you need to gain an edge in betting, it's an incredibly time consuming process. And so unfortunately it's not as easy as wiki capping a fight, scanning win-loss records and putting kind of lazy breakdowns out days and days or weeks and weeks before a UFC card. To actually understand these matchups on a deep level, it takes a lot of time, and that's the reason why I only put out the main card breakdowns, just because it takes me most of the week. It takes a good 30 hours at least to research an entire UFC card, not taking into consideration actually live betting the event then. And obviously I bet football for 6 to 8 hours every day. Quite often while researching UFC, I'll have like football on one monitor, which I'll be live betting, and then I'll have UFC fights to research on the other one. So that's what's up. That is what's up. So yeah, man, let me know how you're doing. Hit the like button if you don't mind. Subscribe if you haven't already. And let's get into breaking down the first fight on this card that I want to talk about, which is going to be the main event between Jared Cannonier and Marvin Vettori. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that both guys are in the even money odds range. Vettori is a slight favourite at average odds of around 1.85, which is going to be minus 118 for an implied probability of 54%. And we can see Cannonier is around an average of 1.95, which is going to be minus 105 for an implied probability of 51%. So Cannonier, 39 years old, 5'11" with a 77.5-inch reach. Vettori, 29 years old, 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach. So we can see there's a couple of X factors to dig into here. The first one being the age. So Vettori is 10 years younger than Cannonier, which statistically gives him a 70% chance of winning. 7-0. So if you were to blind bet that statistic over the long term on the younger fighter winning in a spot like this, you'd obviously do pretty well. You'd win 70% of the time. We can see that Cannonier has also got a bit of a reach advantage, but nothing major. But the age is really the main X factor to focus on here. Now, what is interesting about the age of Cannonier is that he hasn't really shown any signs of decline. And I don't know if this is just because it hasn't really, Father Time hasn't really hit him yet, and it will be hitting him soon. Or if he's one of these outliers like Daniel Cormier that is going to be able to fight, deep into his 40s because he took up mixed martial arts later in life. I think Cannonier only started training martial arts in his mid-20s, so he might not be as beat up as your average 39-year-old middleweight. So at the moment, Cannonier isn't showing any signs of decline, but at 39 years old, it can creep up on you extremely quickly out of nowhere, and overnight Cannonier might look an absolute shadow of himself. So, what does this mean for this fight? Well, this is a really, really difficult fight from a betting point of view, to the point where I've been changing my lean on this one like all week. It's a very, very complicated fight. It's definitely a fight I won't be betting. I don't feel confidently either way here, because the problem I've got with this one is that stylistically, I think it's a really good fight for Jared Cannonier. I think he is pretty well equipped to deal with all of Marvin Vettori's strengths, and I think he is very capable of exploiting a lot of Vettori's weaknesses. So, from a stylistic point of view, I like Cannonier a lot in this fight, and if both Cannonier and Vettori were the same age, I would for sure be betting Cannonier. But trends can't be ignored, and the younger fighter winning 70% of the time when there's a 10-year age gap in a fight is a very, very strong trend, and we would be foolish to ignore that. And that is a nagging doubt I have in my mind in terms of how often we see, older guys in their late 30s find ways to win, find ways to lose against guys that are much younger than them. Vettori, 29 years old, hasn't even hit his prime yet. He should be making big improvements from fight to fight, whereas Cannonier will almost certainly be declining. So the problem I have with this matchup is when I look at the footage and I consider how these two match up stylistically, it's a great fight for Cannonier. But that doubt, that statistic, 70% of the time the older guy loses when there's this big of an age gap in a fight. That's what makes it very difficult to bet someone like Jared Cannonier. And it's very, very important to respect trends such as this. Because if we go to my pre-fight betting results from this year, the profitability chart shows a very interesting story. So we can see we've got this nice uptrend here, really, really nice uptrend. And then we have this period of break-even where the UFC started to hit us with a lot of really poor quality, cards during COVID or post-COVID in the Apex Center. A lot of low-level matchmaking, just a much tougher betting environment. But as you can see, I performed pretty bad over the space of almost a year, where we were just going sideways and breaking even. And then after this really nasty dip here last summer, I thought to myself, I need to fix something. This isn't working, right? Now, we all know pre-fight betting is not my speciality. My bread and butter, my speciality is UFC live betting. We perform phenomenally well live betting on the UFC. If we go to the results page, you can see that we've barely even had a losing quarter. Just non-stop profits for the last 8 years. Since I've been tracking results on the website for the last 8 years, and I was obviously live betting myself 4 or 5 years before I even had the website. So, live betting is my speciality. Pre-fight betting is not. Very open about that. But with the amount of time I put into researching the UFC, betting the UFC, I am profitable at it. Obviously I'm profitable. Otherwise I wouldn't be making these videos and talking about it. So I've got a long history of being profitable pre-fight betting the UFC. But it's nowhere near as lucrative live. And I want that to change. I want to do better. I'm always looking for opportunities to improve. So when we had this bad period last summer, I sat back and I was like, I've got to fix something. Something's got to change. Because how can I go from this to this? Nice, steady, consistent profits to all of a sudden just break even, struggle. And so what I did was sit back and I went through all my bets over the previous year, since this break-even period began. And I looked at what kind of bets I was losing on. Were there any trends between my losing bets? Were there any common denominators? Were there specific types of bets I seemed to be losing on a lot? And what kind of bets was I winning a lot? What kind of bets were we performing really well on? And obviously what I want to do is identify trends and correlations between the kind of bets that are costing me money, trends and correlations between the kind of bets I'm making money on and being profitable on, and I want to place more of the kind of bets that I do well on and less of the kind of bets that I don't perform well on. And when I went back through all my results, I found some trends. And last year, I basically eliminated betting on things which had shown a trend of costing me money. So there were certain types of bets that I was losing on a lot. So what would happen is there were certain types of bets I was winning a lot on, certain types of bets I was losing a lot on. So I'd make a profit on this type of bet, but then I'd give it back on this type of bet, and the end result was break even. So obviously the logical thing to do is stop placing this type of bet, and then all you're left with is profit, right? And so that's what I did last summer. And as you can see, we've been on a nice steady uptrend ever since. It's working really well. And what I'm going to start to do now is get more aggressive and double down on the kind of bets I know I'm performing well on. And then we can start to have these bigger, steeper uptrends. And, just an example of one of the types of bets I perform really well on, I realized that my win rate on women's MMA is over 70%. 7-0. I perform extremely well on women's MMA, and I think the reason being there's a lot less random shit happens on women's MMA. Because we know, generally speaking, you don't get that many flash knockouts in women's MMA. The lighter the weight class, the less knockouts you get, because human beings that don't weigh as much can't deliver as much knockout power, right? It's just a fact. We know. Lower the weight class, the more likely it is a fight goes to a decision. That's a statistical fact. So I think the reason why I perform really well on women's MMA is because when I research a fight and I identify that one fighter has a big advantage over the other, there's less chance of a flash KO causing me to lose a bet, even though my research, my reasoning, my analysis was correct. It's why you do see me bet on women's MMA a lot. I mean, if you look at my last 10 bets, for example, almost half of them are on female fights, right? Pudilova, Tainara Lisboa, Jasmine Jasudavicius, and Irene Aldana, right? 4 out of my last 6 bets are on women's MMA fights, which is interesting because there are far more male MMA fights in the UFC, right? Far more men's divisions in the UFC, yet a disproportionately high percentage of my bets are on women's MMA because I want to lean into the stuff I'm good at. I want to lean into the stuff that I'm profitable at. So why am I talking about this? And I'm talking about this because one of the bets that was consistently costing me money was basically bets like this, where I would research a fight and the older guy would be a really bad stylistic matchup for the younger guy. So I'd research a matchup and I would go, Jared Cannonier is a nightmare of a stylistic matchup for Marvin Vettori. And I believe he is. I believe this is a really, really tough stylistic matchup for Vettori. But what I found was a massive percentage of my losing bets were where I bet on the footage and I bet on the stylistic matchup and I ignored trends such as the younger guy wins 70% of the time when there's a 10-year age gap in a fight. And when I just stopped betting against trends like that, Well, you can see what happened, right? You can see what happened. In the last year, all we've done is win, pretty much. Nice, steady, consistent uptrend. On pre-fight betting, which isn't even my strength. So when it comes to fights like this, as much as I would love to bet Jared Cannonier, because I think this is a great fight for him stylistically, I know that it ain't a smart thing to do. Because irrespective of what the fight footage shows me, these are the kind of bets that cost me money. So I just wanted to give some context behind why you will occasionally see me break down a fight like this one, where it's a great stylistic matchup for one guy and I just won't bet them. That's the reason why. It's because I've implemented rules now, which I know over the long term will keep me on the right track and guide me to profitability. And so, yeah, that's that's just the way it is. And you know what? It's really important for me to talk about this, right? Because if you're in my Discord community, you know that I'm very open about the fact that I've got plans to not be betting MMA for very much longer. In fact, I'd be really disappointed in myself if I was still betting MMA this year. I'm trying to move on to things which are more lucrative, things that I think will enable me to earn a lot more money for far less effort. Obviously, I trade crypto every day. Obviously, you know, in the Discord, all day, every day, I'm sharing what I'm doing in crypto. And also, I'm really, really hoping that by this time next year, I can just fully transition into betting on football. That's what I'd really like to do. And I'm working incredibly hard to do that because I feel not only is football a lot more lucrative, but it would give me a lot more balance to my life than MMA does, where the time zones of when MMA events take place is really difficult for guys in the UK. Our entire weekends are taken over by adjusting sleep cycles and staying up very late, and then you're permanently jet lagged, feeling like a zombie as you try and recover and get back to the European time zone. It's pretty tough. When you think about this, right, a lot of people would be like, well, if your sole focus isn't on MMA and you're concentrating on other things, then that's going to have a detrimental impact on your performance with MMA, right? Because you're not all in on MMA anymore, and we talk all the time about how fighters can't have one foot out the door. If fighters are thinking about retirement, it's one of the main reasons why we bet on Aldana last weekend. Fighters, I can tell you now, you want to talk about trends. I know that Nunes looked great last weekend and dominated, but a strong trend in mixed martial arts is if a fighter talks about retirement, they lose like 90% of the time. This is why Aldana fumbled the ball badly last weekend by not taking the fight to Nunes. Instead, she stood back, showed Nunes too much respect, and was a human punching bag for 25 minutes. But when a fighter talks about retirement, they lose like 90% of the time. But Aldana just made life very, very easily for Nunes. It was like a sparring match. But we talk about how fighters can't be, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. They've got to be all in or their career nosedives. It's actually interesting about me trying to fully transition into betting on football is I think it's made me a much better MMA bettor, a much better gambler on MMA. I think it has made me, I don't want to speak too soon, but I think me working really hard to develop winning strategies for betting on football, it has pushed me pretty close to Jedi level when it comes to betting on UFC. Definitely not all the way there with pre-fight betting, still got a long way to go, but certainly getting there with live betting, because what's actually happened is betting on football is way more difficult than betting on the UFC. Like, betting football is like insane difficulty level to UFC. Like, if we treat it as a video game, like UFC betting is like normal difficulty mode in a video game. Football betting is like, when you play Resident Evil and you complete the game, and when you just play Resident Evil, you've got easy, normal and hard mode. Now if you complete the game on normal or hard mode, you unlock like 2 more difficulty levels, like ultra difficult mode and insane difficult mode. Football's like insane difficult mode. Like UFC betting is like normal mode. It's way easier. So what's happened is, it's like when you lift weights, right? When you lift weights, when you first start lifting weights, the weights that you start with, they're really hard to lift. But then after you lift weights for like a year and you slowly progress into lifting heavier and heavier and heavier weights, after a year, when you go back to lifting the weights that you first started with, they're nothing to you. Like, they feel so light. As you've got stronger, you've grown. That's what I think football betting has done to me when it comes to UFC betting. Because football is so much harder. I've had to go through so much mental growth with football that it has made me look very differently upon UFC betting. So when UFC betting was all I was focused on, it was very challenging and all-consuming. Whereas now, because I've grown so much and been pushed so hard and it's been so difficult with football, when I go back to UFC now, it's so much easier than it was before. And a really good example of why is we have one UFC event a week, 12 fights, 14 fights, 15 fights, something like that. When UFC was my sole focus, every week I'd be like, right, 12 fights, 14 fights, we've got to go through all these fights in a lot of depth, and we've really got to dig up good value bets. We've got to find some bets because, we've only got 12, 14 fights this week. And I would put a lot of emphasis on finding bets on that card. But what happens when you look really hard for something, right? If you keep looking hard for something, eventually you'll find it. But maybe what you find isn't what you were looking for. Just you looked for it so hard and you ended up finding something. You couldn't find what you wanted, so you found something not quite what you wanted. You found something else instead, right? Your brain tricked you into thinking it was what you wanted. That's how I'm seeing UFC pre-fight betting at the moment, where we've got 14 fights on this card. And before I would be like really, really hell-bent on, finding good bets. Whereas now, I don't really care whether I find a bet or not. Because I've got, Holland versus Croatia in the Nations League tonight that I'll be betting. I've got Moroccan Premier League football that I'll be betting later on. I've got European qualifiers coming on later this week. So my attention isn't solely on UFC. So when I go to bet UFC and I go to research these fights, I'm way more chill about it. And of course, gambling, betting on sports, it's all mental. So if you're not, trying to find bets, you're in a way better position to think clearly and see things for what they really are. So you guys will probably notice, if you're in my community, we don't place that many bets anymore. But when we do, they're fucking good. And the fighters that we bet usually dominate. Look, we take high-risk gambles like Irene Aldana and she loses every once in a while, sure. But Jazz Duvicius dominated. Chase Hooper dominated. Tainara Lisboa pretty much dominated. Belal Muhammad pretty much dominated. Pedro Munoz did extremely well as an underdog. Max Holloway performed really well. So the point being, I don't place many bets anymore, but when I do place bets, they're absolutely rock solid, and that's why you see these nice, steady, consistent uptrends now, where pre-fight bets are performing really well. Because now, where I am, really trying hard to beat football, be profitable on football, when I come back to UFC, I'm chill. Okay, are we going to be betting Jared Cannonier and Marvin Vettori? No, we don't need to bet this. We've got 30 football matches this week to focus on, as well as 14 UFC fights. I don't need to bet this fight, even though I think it's a good stylistic matchup for Cannonier. I don't need to bet it, because there's going to be way better opportunities if we're patient. Why do I need to bet on a 39-year-old guy against a young, hungry bull like Vettori, where if I'm patient, I might get another Jazz Duvicius in a couple of weeks' time at big underdog odds. I might get another Chase Hooper at even money odds. I might get another Tainara Lisboa at even money odds. Why do I need to bet 39-year-old fighters who are going to be declining, when if I'm patient, I know I'll be able to bet a young, hungry bull in the near future that has got a big advantage over their opponent? And so, football has enabled me to be way more chill these days and just do absolutely nothing most of the time. Of course, not do nothing, because I still research every fight on every single UFC card in a lot of depth. But by do nothing, I mean place no bets if there's no need to. And it's been working really well. That's a big part of the reason why results are improving a lot, and I think they're going to continue to improve. So let's break down this fight from a stylistic point of view. Why is this a good stylistic matchup for Jared Cannonier? Well, it is a good stylistic matchup for him because he is a significantly better striker than Marvin Vettori. Vettori's performance against Roman Dolidze was red flag city. I know a lot of people are high on Dolidze, and he definitely surprised me in that fight. He's making big improvements. You know, Dolidze is making giant leap forwards in every matchup, but Dolidze is nowhere near the level of striker that Jared Cannonier is, and yet, in my opinion, Dolidze outstruck Vettori in this matchup. It's a win on paper, but Vettori looked absolutely awful. Cannonier is levels and levels and levels above striking when it comes to Dolidze from a technical point of view. He's faster, he's more powerful, he's more technical, he throws a more diverse range of strikes, certainly throws a higher volume of strikes. And so if Dolidze was able to cause Vettori big problems on the feet, I can only imagine Jared Cannonier will eat him alive. And some of the ways in which Cannonier can cause Vettori problem in this fight is that he's a lot faster than Vettori. He's got a really nice kicking game where Vettori doesn't really throw too many kicks, got more of a boxing based style. And he's just a lot better defensively, he moves a lot better footwork. Vettori's not the best defensively, he's quite slow. So on the feet, even at 39 years old, Cannonier should have a big advantage when it comes to striking. Now obviously Father Time could hit him really hard this weekend and Vettori could look great on the feet, but at least based on past performances, Cannonier should give Vettori hell in this matchup. So in order for Vettori to win this fight, based on past performances, he's going to have to use a grappling heavy game plan, because we know he's a good offensive wrestler with a very high level ground game, and we know that Cannonier's weakness is on the ground. The problem is Vettori doesn't use grappling heavy game plans. Yes, he will shoot takedowns in a fight. We saw him try to take Costa down. Saw him take Kevin Holland down a bunch of times. We saw him try to take Izzy down. I mean, he did a couple of times, wasn't able to hold Izzy down for long. So Vettori will grapple. The problem with Vettori is he doesn't use grappling heavy game plans. He doesn't go out there with like a Jasmine Jasudavicius type performance where she's really going to spam those takedowns and chain wrestle and really work hard to get the fight to the ground. Vettori is one of these guys that will tend to commit really hard to a takedown. And if you stuff the takedown or he gets you down and you quickly pop back up to your feet, that's it. You'll then abandon the takedown. And for the rest of the round, he won't shoot another takedown until the next round. And that makes him pretty easy to neutralize, because if he gets a takedown and you quickly pop up back to your feet, he doesn't really score off that takedown. And he's not going to shoot another takedown for a while. On top of that, if you stuff the takedown, you know you're kind of off the hook, because he's probably not going to shoot another one until at least the next round. And the reason why Vettori does this is because he does slow down a lot the more he grapples. So his biggest strength is his grappling. He's a very good offensive wrestler, very high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but he's kind of cursed in a way in that he can't grapple too hard or he slows down a lot, which then makes his striking less effective and his grappling less effective. Like if you go and watch his fight against Kevin Holland, he did take Holland down a bunch of times. However, he was also looking pretty tired around the midway point of that fight. What let him off the hook is that Holland kept giving up cheap takedowns. But Cannonier is far harder to take down and hold down. Now, Cannonier's takedown offense isn't great, but it's not terrible either. And Cannonier is one of these guys that if you take him down, he's very good at working his way back up to his feet. He just has that bullish physicality where he's very good at rolling to his knees and standing back up. And so this is a really interesting fight, because we know based on past performances that Cannonier has got a pretty big advantage when it comes to striking, and Vettori isn't that well positioned to exploit Cannonier's biggest weakness, which is his ground game, because he doesn't grapple that much. He tires out a lot when he does, and even when he does get someone like Cannonier down, Cannonier is pretty good at popping back up to his feet. So stylistically, this is a really good fight for Cannonier, and I do lean towards him. But the trend is your friend until the end of the trend. Shout out to Eric Crown's Crypto Cave. Check him out. Shout out to him for the quote. I don't know if it's his quote, but that's where I heard it from first. So yeah, man, it's a strong trend to fight, but I do think it's a good stylistic matchup for Cannonier. Let me know what you think in the comments below. So What do we think about the over-under on this one? Well, I think it is very likely this fight goes to a decision. Both guys are tough as nails. Both have great cardio. Both are very difficult to finish. If we look at their records, we can see that 4 out of Cannonier's last 5 have gone to a decision. And we can see that Vettori's last 6 fights have gone to a decision. So very, very likely this fight goes to a decision. If it were to end inside the distance, I think it's because something crazy's happened, like a disqualification or a no contest. Or I think it would be Vettori by submission. I don't think either guy is going to be able to knock the other out. They've both got very good chins. Vettori doesn't really have knockout power. He's more of a volume striker. Cannonier does have knockout power, but obviously Vettori is a dog with one of the best chins in the division. You know, he went toe-to-toe with Izzy, Costa, Whittaker, who were all big hitters, and none of them could get him out of there. So maybe Cannonier can land the bomb and knock him out, but it's unlikely based on how durable he's looked in the past. So if this fight were to end inside the distance, I do think it would be Vettori by submission, because Cannonier is very low level on the ground, and Vettori is a very high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. But then if Kevin Holland can survive on the ground with him for 5 rounds, pretty good chance Cannonier can as well, because we know we know Holland very, very low level on the ground. So pretty good chance this goes the distance. I might actually bet that myself. In terms of the prop bets on this one, Cannonier by decision would interest me. I don't bet props, but if you're the kind of guy that wants to bet props to make, you know, maybe a little bit on every fight to make watching a fight more interesting, I think Cannonier by decision is your best value prop. Just as he's likely to outstrike Vettori and land the more damaging, more impactful shots. So, hope you found that breakdown useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. It's a really complex matchup. It could go either way. So now let's break down, I hate to say this, but an absolutely pointless co-main event between Arman Tsarukyan and Joaquin Buckley. Now, on one hand, I like this fight because I do feel that the universe owes Tsarukyan a little bit of fortune. He was absolutely robbed in his fight against Mateusz Gamrot. I think the Gamrot decision was one of the worst. In fact, it was one of the worst decisions I've ever seen. It is awful. It was so bad, I actually made a video rewatching this fight, scoring it round by round. And you know, every time I watch it, I score it the same. And it's just a horrendous decision. So I don't hate the fact that the UFC are giving Tsarukyan a layup here, because he certainly deserves some fortune after how badly he was robbed against Gamrot. But all the same, for us as fans, it is a bit of a pointless matchup and an absolutely dead one from a betting point of view. We can see Tsarukyan is an absolute massive favourite at 1.10, which is minus 1,000 for an implied probability of 91%. And we can see that his opponent Silva is a big underdog at average odds of 7.50, which is plus 650 for an implied probability of 13%. It's a dead fight for betting because it's such a great stylistic matchup for Tsarukyan that you really can't give Silva much of a realistic chance of winning this. However, you can't bet Tsarukyan because his advantages are baked into his odds. So this is a fight where the bookies have absolutely nailed the odds. There's no value on either side. Don't want to spend too long on this one because I don't think it's going to be particularly good for live betting either. So dwelling on this one and spending time breaking this one down in a lot of depth is a bit of a waste of everyone's time, because I would imagine Tsarukyan absolutely dominates here. It's a very tough stylistic matchup for Silva because Tsarukyan is tough, he's durable, he's got great cardio, very good chin, very technical striking, fights at a high pace, high volume, great kicks, great boxing, great footwork, great movement, the total package, elite striker. Silva is a decent striker, but his base is striking. Despite his nickname being Neto BJJ, he's actually primarily a striker. And this fight's problematic because Tsarukyan is a better striker than the striker. So Tsarukyan, significantly better striker than Silva, moves better, better defensively, throws a higher volume of strikes, more technical, the whole 9 yards, the total package. Where this fight becomes even more problematic for Silva is that Tsarukyan is one of the best MMA grapplers in the division. He's unbelievable. I mean, he might even be... I mean, this fight's at lightweight, but if he dropped down to featherweight, obviously you got Volk in the mix, and he showed us what he was capable of in his fight against Makhachev. But Tsarukyan, maybe just behind Volk, is probably the best grappler in the featherweight division if he chose to drop down, which he probably should, with him only being 5'7" with a 72.5-inch reach. He's got the wingspan for featherweight, but I digress. He's an amazing MMA grappler, and Silva's takedown defense and ground game is not terrible, but it's nowhere near the level it needs to be to stop Tsarukyan from doing whatever he wants to him. So, great stylistic matchup for Tsarukyan. And I really don't see a realistic path to victory for Silva, which is quite unusual for me to say, because as you know, I love to bet an underdog, right? I love to dig for value on the underdogs. As you can see, we had 2 big wins last weekend. If I, most of the time I will lean dog or pass if I don't have a strong feeling on a matchup. This is a tough one because you'd have to be crazy to bet Tsarukyan in this odds range, but at the same time, Silva's going to need a miracle in order to win. Because of the way the odds are, if you really, 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 really want to bet this fight and most likely set fire to your money, you kind of do have to bet Silva. Like, as much as I love Tsarukyan, it still is a dog or pass fight just because of the odds. But Silva is no real path to victory other than something crazy happening, like an injury to Tsarukyan or a flash KO or a disqualification, something like that, which can all happen. But do you really want to bet on those things? That's when you may as well just go play roulette in a casino or a slot machine. You know what I mean? It's like total gambling. But anyway, Tsarukyan should get this done. So in terms of the over-under on this one, it's where things get a little bit interesting because the odds are quite wide. I wouldn't be surprised to see this fight go to a decision. At 4.0 plus 300, again, is the fight going to a decision the most likely outcome? Probably not. But with how wide the odds are, it definitely gives you the best risk to reward ratio. If we look at Silva's record, I know he's, a bunch of his fights have ended inside the distance, but he is a tough fucker. He is tough. And when you look at Tsarukyan's record, a good number of his fights do go the distance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of his last 8 have gone to a decision. So even though Tsarukyan's likely to be very dominant here, and he is better than Silva everywhere, it's not going to be easy to get Silva out of there because he's tough. He is primarily a striker, so it's not going to be easy to get him out of there on the feet, especially because Tsarukyan's a volume striker. And on the ground, he is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and Tsarukyan tends to favour more grappling control over submissions. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see this fight go to a decision. And for that reason, if you really want to bet the over-under on this one, fight goes to a decision. I've seen worse bets, to be fair. And of course, the knock-on effect from that is, I don't bet props, but if you want to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching it more interesting, in fact, forget I said that. I was going to say Tsarukyan to win by decision. That's pointless because the odds are basically the same as betting this fight to go to a decision. So yeah, don't bother with a prop on this one. If you really want to bet this fight, I think fight goes to decision gives you a pretty good risk to reward ratio. It's not particularly likely to win, but again, like with the Aldana bet and the Jazza Dovicius bet last weekend, you don't need to win many bets in this odds range to turn an overall profit. And the same goes for bets such as this. So yeah, hope you found that breakdown video useful. What's Bitcoin doing? Not a lot. Hasn't been doing very much all day as it happens, but I'm keeping my eye on it. So I have got a cheeky little long. So I need to keep my eye on the prize, so nothing gets crazy. Alright, let's break down the next fight. So now let's break down the next fight between Christian Leroy Duncan and Armen Petrosyan. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, Duncan is the favourite at average odds of about 1.67, which is going to be minus 149 for an implied probability of 60%. we take a look at the odds on Petrosyan, he's around an average of 2.25, which is going to be plus 125 for an implied probability of 44%. So Duncan is 27 years old, 6'2" with a 79-inch reach. Petrosyan is 32 years old, 6'3" with a 71-inch reach. So there is one X factor in particular to focus on, which is the 8-inch reach advantage for Duncan, which statistically gives Duncan around a 70% chance of winning in this fight. An 8-inch reach advantage is very substantial, especially in a fight between two strikers, two kickboxers, because ultimately what it means is that Duncan can land strikes on Petrosyan from a range where Petrosyan cannot counter, unless he comes forward, covers a lot of distance to get close enough to Duncan to land a shot on him. So that is a significant advantage in this fight for Duncan, and Duncan knows how to use it. He fights very long, he's a very technical striker, and he's very good defensively with good footwork and good movement, and that's why he's favoured in this. Because when you look at these two guys, they're pretty good strikers, they're pretty good kickboxers, but I think the thing that separates the two is Duncan's footwork, movement and defense. And then when you throw the reach advantage on top of that, you can see that Petrosyan is probably going to have quite a difficult time getting inside and landing. Petrosyan is a very one-dimensional kickboxer. He wants to stand in front of you in boxing range, and he wants to win a kickboxing match. The problem is, in an MMA contest, the range and distance is different to kickboxing. You've got the clinch, you've got grappling, and Duncan is basically better at everything MMA related than Petrosyan is. Petrosyan is a very one-dimensional kickboxer. He's not going to take you down. His takedown offense isn't great. He's not great on the ground. Outside of being a really robust kickboxer, there's not a lot else that Petrosyan does. Duncan is a way more well-rounded mixed martial artist, which means he's got way more weapons that he's bringing into this fight. He can do a little bit of grappling. Of course, he's primarily a striker, but we know Petrosyan's takedown offense is very bad. He's very low level on the ground. So grappling's an area where Duncan will have an edge. And I think Duncan's also got an edge in terms of his ability to use his reach and his range. Like I say, Petrosyan wants to stand in the middle of the octagon and win a kickboxing match. But Duncan's a pretty good kickboxer, and he's got that reach, he's got that length, he's got that footwork, he's got that movement. He can mix it up better in the clinch and on the ground. And I just think he's a more well-rounded mixed martial artist with more ways to win. So Petrosyan's a tough fight for him for sure. But if we're being realistic, Petrosyan's a very one-dimensional kickboxer. You know what his strengths are, you know what his weaknesses are, you know exactly what to game plan for. And so I think this is a pretty good stylistic matchup with Duncan. Now, you know, we don't know a whole lot about Duncan. He's only faced a relatively low level of opponent outside of the UFC. A lot of his fights have ended very quickly. But he moves well, he's fast, he's athletic, he's undefeated. And it's a good stylistic matchup for him. It is a big step up in competition because Petrosyan is a tough fucker. But I think Duncan's going to be able to use his length, his size, his reach, his technique to do pretty well this weekend. So in terms of the over-under on this one, I don't really have a strong opinion on it, simply because we've never seen Duncan face a high-level striker, so we don't really know what his chin is like. We know Petrosyan is very, very durable. We saw him get his nose absolutely crushed in his fight against Rodriguez. But even though he has been a bit of a decisionator with all three of his UFC fights going to a decision, he is pretty mean, he is pretty nasty, he does hit pretty hard. So Duncan's chin is going to have to be on point here. Like, if you look at Petrosyan's record, you'd say there's a pretty decent chance this fight goes to a decision. With Duncan being mostly unproven, that is a tricky one to bet. So I don't really have an opinion on the over-under on this one. Duncan is still a bit of an unknown for me, which is why I'm passing on the fight from a betting point of view. I think this is one of those fights where, similar to Mike Mallet last weekend, we've just got to kind of hope the fight goes to to a decision, and then we get to see Duncan against, you know, a decent level of opponent for the first time, and we'll get to learn about his cardio, strengths and weaknesses, his pacing, his fight IQ. And then next time he fights, we'll have a lot more information to work with. So in terms of a prop on this one, yeah, again, without knowing more about Duncan, I don't feel confident, predicting highly specific outcomes such as that. So, yeah, this one's a wait and see. We'll have to wait and see. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card between Lucas Almeida and Pat Sabatini. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Lucas Almeida is the slight underdog at average odds of around 2.55, which is going to be plus 155 for an implied probability of 39%. We take a look at the odds on Sabatini. He's around an average of 1.55, which is going to be minus 182 for an implied probability of 65%. So Almeida, 32 years old, 5'11" with a 71-inch reach, and Sabatini, 32 years old, 5'8" with a 70-inch reach. So no major X factors to the naked eye there, but one X factor that I do want to point out is that even though it doesn't look like on paper there's that much of a size difference between these two, in reality I think they may be, because Sabatini is quite small and he really lacks physicality in the division. One of the reasons why Sabatini has got really good cardio and he can push a high pace is because he just doesn't have that kind of big power, crushing physicality to his game. And so his gas tank holds up a lot better than someone that is really big, really muscular, relies a lot on their power and athleticism. So Sabatini is blessed with amazing cardio, but the downside of that is that he just lacks physicality. He always feels he always just feels a bit undersized. So Almeida is the complete opposite. Even though he's not particularly big, there's real power and physicality to everything that he does. There's a real clunkiness, a real heaviness, real power to everything that he does. And so he could have a big edge in physicality in this one, even though the size stats don't really reflect it. So in terms of how these two match up stylistically, it's obviously a classic striker versus grappler matchup. Almeida is the striker, and if the fight stays standing, he's going to do really well. Sabatini is the grappler, and if he can use a grappling heavy game plan, he's likely to do well. So when we're breaking this fight down, working out, which guy is the better bet, our main focus should be on how likely is it that Sabatini is going to be able to implement a grappling heavy game plan here to get a win. And this is one of those interesting fights where if you just go off the footage, this is a very good stylistic matchup for Pat Sabatini, because in Lucas Almeida's past fights, his takedown offense and ground game has looked pretty bad, and also when guys have forced him to grapple a little bit, he's tired out quite quickly. So on the surface, this looks like a really, really good stylistic matchup for Pat Sabatini, which is probably why he's a reasonably big favourite. However, in all my years of experience, I have learnt there are certain fights where you need to be a little bit nuanced and read between the lines and try and figure out exactly what is going on. And this is one of those matchups because Almeida's takedown offense and ground game looked really bad in his fights back in 2018, 2019, 2021. But these fights were like 2, 3 and 4 years ago. And fighters are on a continuous journey of self-improvement. And Almeida is a guy that has improved a lot. The version of him that we saw in his debut against Mike Trezano is unrecognizable from the version that we've seen from him in the past. He's one of these guys that is making exponential improvements. He looks like a different human being. His striking is so much better than he used to be. So I look at a fight like this and I go, if his striking has improved exponentially in the last 2, 3, 4 years, it's also possible that his grappling and takedown defense could have improved in the last 2, 3, 4 years, and that completely changes Sabatini's probability of winning this fight. And so this is one of those matchups where the past performances of these two suggest it's a good stylistic matchup for Sabatini, but I think it's a dangerous fight for Sabatini, because I think Almeida is likely to be a lot better this weekend than what we've seen from him in the past. The problem with this matchup is that Almeida is a big, strong, physically imposing fighter, and because Sabatini lacks physicality to his grappling, he just may not have the physicality to get Almeida down and hold him down. I think Sabatini's best chance of winning this is to implement a grappling heavy game plan, which he usually does, lots of chain wrestling, lots of persistent grappling, and then even if he does struggle to get Almeida down and hold him down early because he doesn't have the physicality to hold down the bigger, stronger man, what I think we're likely to see is all that grappling wear Almeida out, and then in the second half of the fight it'll become easier for Sabatini to take Almeida down and to hold him down. But potentially a tricky fight for Sabatini is really going to depend on how much Almeida's takedown offense and ground game is improved. But like I say, if his striking's improved a lot, it's reasonable for us to assume his grappling, his takedown offense has improved a lot as well. So based on past performances, I do agree with the odds and I do lean towards Sabatini for sure. But there's no way I can bet him because I suspect Almeida is a lot better than what he used to be. Now, on the flip side, I'm not interested in betting Almeida because it would be very foolish of us to bet on a guy with an implied probability of 40% that has shown bad takedown offense and a bad ground game in the past when he's now facing, you know, a really good offensive wrestler with, you know, decent MMA grappling. So this fight's an easy pass for me. If you really want to bet this fight, even though I don't think there's any value on either side, if you really want to bet this one, I do think Sabatini is the better bet out of the two. But having said that, he isn't a strong position at these odds because his advantages are baked into the odds and they don't factor in the potential that Almeida's takedown offense and ground game is a lot better than it was in the past. So in terms of the over-under on this one, I think it's very likely this fight goes to a decision. So I will likely be betting this. The reason being, if you look at Sabatini's record, he is a bit of a decisionator. You can see he frequently goes to a decision. He's not really a finisher on the ground. Doesn't really have, you know, a dangerous submission game or big knockout power. He's one of these guys who wants to grab a hold of you, take you down and wear you out with grappling control. Almeida is a dangerous striker, but he's obviously going to be far less likely to knock Sabatini out if he's spending most of the fight defending takedowns and on his back. On the flip side, Almeida's a tough guy who could probably defend himself pretty well on the ground. And since Sabatini is not really a dangerous grappler, more of a control guy, pretty good chance Almeida can kind of survive on the ground. So styles make fights, and even though a lot of Almeida's fights have ended inside the distance, if we assume Sabatini's probably going to be able to, spend a lot of this time working with takedowns in the clinch or on the ground, that dramatically increases the probability of the fight going to a decision. And you know what? If you do want to bet Sabatini this weekend, I think betting on this fight to go to a decision is virtually the same thing, because I would be surprised if Sabatini finished Almeida. Therefore, that bet would actually give you a better risk to reward ratio on the outside chance that Almeida are able to find a way to win a decision. So I quite like this at underdog odds, and I'll probably be betting it. I think the reason why the odds are underdog is, wiki cappers have probably just looked at Almeida's record and gone, oh yeah, this guy, he's dangerous on the feet, he's aggressive, he's got knockout power, a bunch of his fights end inside the distance, and so they've just kind of capped the over at underdog odds without realizing how these two guys match up from a stylistic point of view. Actually makes it more likely that this fight will go to a decision, in my opinion. Yes. All right, so what does that mean for props? So Sabatini to win by decision is the most likely prop, but the odds are absolutely terrible, so I wouldn't bother with that. I would just stick with fight goes to a decision. If you want to sprinkle a little bit of money on this one to make watching the fight more interesting, I think that would be your best prop. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the fight between Nicolas Motta and Manuel Torres. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Torres is a pretty big favourite at average odds of about 1.55, which is minus 182 for an implied probability of 65%. We take a look at the odds on Motta. He's around an average of 2.50, which is going to be plus 150 for an implied probability of 40%. So Motta is 30 years old, 5'9", with a 70.5-inch reach, and Torres, 28 years old, 5'10", with a 73-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age. What I would say is that this is one of those fights where I would quite like to see the weigh-ins, only because I do have a feeling that Manuel Torres might have a pretty big size advantage here, but is basically the stats on the tail of the tape suggest both guys are roughly the same size. I only say that because when you look at both guys in the octagon, Motta looks quite small and compact, whereas Torres looks absolutely huge. So even though the tail of the tape is roughly the same, we know sometimes it can be wrong, sometimes it can be misleading. So I don't know if there is going to be a size difference between these two, but it's one of those fights where I definitely want to see the face-offs. See if there is any notable size advantage for Torres, which there may or may not be. I mean, even there you can kind of see he's compact. Torres is long and tall. We'll have to see. So this is one of those fights where it's very, very difficult to form an opinion on it. In fact, I don't really have much of an opinion on it, because we can see that every single one of Torres' fights dating back to 2018 has ended in round 1. So similar to Mike Mallet from last weekend, who was in a similar position where all his fights dating back to 2017 had ended in round 1. We just don't know a whole lot about Torres. We don't know very much about how he's going to look past round 1, how his cardio is going to hold up. We don't really know anything about his takedown offense and ground game. We know a decent amount about his striking because, you know, most of his fights have been stand-up fights, but outside of that, Manuel Torres, bit of an unknown, which makes this an impossible fight for betting. Based on what I have seen, both guys appear to be primarily strikers. You can see that Torres does have a decent amount of submissions on his record, but he tends to be one of these guys that wants to stand and bang and brawl for the most part. When you look at both of them, Torres and Motta both have big power. There's no denying that. They both hit very hard. Both very dangerous strikers. The thing for me that separates these two on the feet is that Motta's far more technical and far better defensively. Torres is probably more physically imposing, more powerful, but he's wild, he's reckless, and he's not particularly good defensively. There's more of a tightness to everything Motta does, and while he doesn't throw as high volume of strikes as Torres, Torres is definitely more aggressive, definitely the higher volume striker. One thing that did stand out to me was that Torres was quite bad defensively, quite slow to react to what his opponent was doing, and Motta's got fast hands, big knockout power in his hands. Outside of that, I don't really have much for you because of a limited amount of footage available on Torres. We don't really know much about his takedown offense and ground game or his cardio. So from a betting point of view, it's a bit of a dead fight for betting, because without knowing more about Torres, we can't really form an opinion on this one. So in terms of the over-under, again, I don't really know. What I'd say is, you know, probably a good chance this one does end inside the distance, just because both guys have got big power. You see, you know, every single one of Torres' fights dating back over the last 5 years have ended in round 1. You can see, you know, a lot of Motta's fights end inside the distance as well. So the fight probably does end inside the distance because of how dangerous both guys are on the feet. But I don't have too much more information for you on that front. And then in terms of the props, again, very difficult to bet a highly specific outcome on a fight like this when we don't know a whole lot about one of the fighters. What I would say is, from a money line betting point of view, if you really want to bet this fight, I don't know why you would want to, because it is basically a complete unknown, but if you did want to gamble, you have to take Motta at underdog odds, because at least we know more about him. At least we know his cardio is reasonably good, his grappling's alright, he's a decently technical striker, looks more technical than Torres, because for all we know, Torres could completely fall apart and look awful if this fight were to go to the second round. Of course, with him being Mexican, unlikely his cardio is bad, but you never know. You never know how he's going to look in rounds 2 and 3. And with how aggressive he is as well, it makes him more prone to an adrenaline dump. But Motta's a dangerous striker. You know, he can go hard for 3 rounds, no problem. So yeah, this one's a bit dead from a betting point of view and a complete unknown. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight, which is going to be Nicholas Dalby against Muslim, the King of Kung Fu, Salikhov. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that I think these are on a different part of the site. They're on a different event for some reason. So Salikhov is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.53, which is going to be minus 189 for an implied probability of 65%. If we take a look at the odds on Dalby, he's around an average of 2.50, which is going to be plus 150 for an implied probability of 40%. So Dalby, 38 years old, 5'11", with a 74.5-inch reach. And Salikhov, 39 years old, 5'11", with a 70-inch reach. So the only real notable X factor there, aside from the fact both these guys are very old, is the fact that Dalby has got a 4.5-inch reach advantage, which is very nice in a fight like this. So this is one of those fights where Muslim Salikhov is better than Dalby in most areas. He's certainly a more powerful striker. He's certainly a more technical striker. And both guys have big issues on the ground. What I would say about both these guys when it comes to grappling is they're both reasonably good offensively. They've both got reasonably good, offensive wrestling. But they both have very bad takedown offense, and they're both very weak off their back. Out of the two, Salikhov is better at working his way back up to his feet than Dalby is, but they're both still pretty bad on the ground. The way I look at this fight is it's going to be skill, power, and technique of Salikhov versus the volume and the work rate of Dalby, because Dalby's one of these guys that is not particularly good at anything. His strength is in his cardio, his toughness, and his work rate, which are pretty good strengths to have in a cage fight to the death, to be fair. So this is one of those matchups where early on I would expect Dalby to struggle very bad, because he's not going to be able to take Salikhov down easily. He's not going to be able to hold him down easily. He's probably not going to be able to control Salikhov in the clinch that easy because of how physically strong Salikhov is early in the fight. And he's also probably going to struggle to get to Salikhov and land anything because of how good the footwork and movement of Salikhov is. So early I expect this fight to be really, really difficult for Dalby. But Dalby is very good at doing what Irene Aldana failed to do against Amanda Nunes last week, and he's very good at hanging in there and making you work really hard, so that even when he's not having any success in terms of scoring points, he is putting money in the bank by making you work, and he's constantly attacking you and making you engage on the feet with his high volume of striking. If he's not doing that, he's trying to make you defend takedowns and burn through energy that way, or battle for position in the clinch. So this is one of those fights where early on Salikhov is likely going to do very, very well, because he's going to outclass Dalby standing up and on the ground. But if Dalby can keep the pressure up, keep the work rate up, which I've no doubt he can, because that's what he always does, there will come a tipping point in this fight where momentum will start to swing in Dalby's favour as Salikhov starts to tire. So the question here is, at what point in the fight does that happen? I'm pretty sure Salikhov wins round 1, and I'm pretty sure Dalby wins round 3. It's going to come a tipping point in round 2, where whoever wins round 2 is going to win the fight. And it's going to be a question of whether or not Salikhov slows enough in the second for Dalby to outwork him in the second and then take a 29-28 decision. That's how I see this fight. So I understand why Salikhov is the favourite, because he should win the first round. He's better than Dalby everywhere. Not a massive advantage when it comes to grappling, but certainly a little better. And so, unless Dalby makes him work really, really, really hard, early. Salikhov has also probably got good enough gas tank to win the second as well. So I understand why Salikhov is the favourite here. But it is a tough fight for both guys. So I will not be betting it. If you really want to bet this fight, I would go Salikhov. But he is not a good bet at these odds. And you are not getting a particularly good risk to reward ratio on your money. In terms of the over-under, I think it's pretty likely this one goes to a decision. If you look at Dalby's record, 5 of his last 6 have gone to a decision. He is a bit of a decisionator. If we look at Salikhov, 3 of his last 5 have gone to a decision, but this one almost went to a decision. So very close to 4 out of his last 5 go into a decision. So both these guys are decisionators. They're both tough as nails. Difficult to get out of there. So I think it will most likely go to a decision. In terms of prop bets, Salikhov by decision is what I'd be looking at, but the odds are absolutely terrible. And that isn't worth betting. A highly specific outcome like that in a sport as random as MMA. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, please. It helps so much. It takes so much effort, work to do these videos for not that many people to actually watch them. So the more likes it gets, the more it gets pumped out to more people, which makes the effort more worthwhile. So really appreciate that. Nice one, guys. Have a great week. Hope you make loads of money this weekend. Take care, everybody. I will see you all next week for another one. Nice one, guys. Bye.